On the night of September 1, 1666, beneath a sky that gave no warning of catastrophe, a small and ordinary mistake inside a modest bakery on Pudding Lane set in motion one of the most devastating disasters in urban history. The bakery belonged to Thomas Farriner, the King's baker, and like countless others in the crowded city of London, it relied on a wood-fired oven that burned late into the evening. Sometime after midnight, a spark, perhaps from embers not fully extinguished, caught hold of nearby fuel. In a city built largely of timber and dried by weeks of relentless summer heat, that single spark found perfect conditions to grow. London in 1666 was not the grand, open city we know today. It was still medieval in character, crowded, chaotic, and combustible. Within the old Roman walls, roughly 80,000 people lived in tightly packed dwellings. Beyond the walls, suburbs expanded rapidly, cramming thousands more into fragile housing. Streets were so narrow that sunlight struggled to reach the cobbled ground below. Houses leaned inward at upper levels in a style known as jettying, where each floor extended slightly beyond the one beneath it. Neighbors could stretch out their hands and touch across alleyways. This dense arrangement created tunnels of darkness and stale air, but more dangerously, it formed continuous corridors of fuel. Most buildings were timber-framed, their walls filled with wattle and daub, their roofs layered in thatch or wooden shingles sealed with pitch. Workshops stored oils, tar, coal, cloth, and spirits. Warehouses near the Thames were stacked high with imported goods from across the world. Homes and businesses often shared walls. Fire, once started, would not have to leap far, it could simply travel. The summer of 1666 had been exceptionally dry. For weeks, little rain had fallen. Timber beams shrank and cracked from dehydration. Even the River Thames, London's natural source of firefighting water, ran lower than usual. On that fateful night, a strong easterly wind swept steadily across the city, pushing air through the narrow streets like a bellows feeding a forge. When Farriner and his family awoke in the early hours of Sunday, September 2nd, they found flames consuming their home. Smoke choked the rooms, heat drove them upward. In desperation, they climbed through an upstairs window and escaped across adjoining rooftops. One maid, too frightened to follow, remained behind and became the first recorded victim of what would soon be known as the Great Fire of London. At first, the fire did not appear extraordinary. Small blazes were common in London, and the city had developed routine methods for dealing with them. Buckets of water were passed hand to hand. Leather fire engines, little more than hand-pumped sprayers, were rolled into place. Most importantly, fire breaks were created by pulling down buildings in the fire's path using hooks and ropes, depriving flames of fuel. The Lord Mayor, Sir Thomas Bloodworth, was summoned to assess the situation. From a distance, he surveyed the growing blaze. Whether from fatigue, misjudgment, or denial, he concluded the fire was minor. He reportedly dismissed it as something that a woman might piss out and returned home without authorizing aggressive demolition. That hesitation would prove catastrophic. Through the night, flames moved from house to house, carried not only by direct contact but by embers lifted into the air. The wind strengthened. Sparks flew across streets and ignited rooftops ahead of the main blaze. By dawn, the fire had spread beyond control. When the flames reached the warehouses along the Thames waterfront, the disaster intensified dramatically. These structures held oil, pitch, tallow, spirits, hemp, and coal materials that burned with explosive force. Barrels erupted, hurling burning fragments high into the air. The river, instead of serving as a defense, became bordered by walls of fire. Heat grew so intense that observers described it as resembling a furnace rather than an ordinary blaze. By Sunday afternoon, panic had begun to spread. Residents hurried to save what they could. Families loaded carts with furniture, bedding, tools, and valuables. Some buried coins and silver in gardens, hoping to retrieve them later. Others ferried goods across the Thames by boat. Cart drivers raised their prices shamelessly as desperation grew. Streets clogged with traffic, hindering firefighting efforts. The fire advanced steadily westward, moving at roughly half a mile per hour. That pace seemed slow, almost manageable, but it was relentless. The wind turned streets into channels of flame. Attempts to create fire breaks came too late and were too small. Without clear legal authority to destroy private property, officials hesitated. Precious hours slipped away. As night fell on Sunday, the city glowed red. Smoke blotted out the stars. Bells rang in alarm across parishes, though many would soon melt in their towers. The ancient capital, heart of English commerce and government, was now fully engulfed in a struggle it was losing. By Monday, September 3rd, the fire had become a full urban catastrophe. Entire districts were ablaze. Panic gave way to chaos. People fled not only with possessions but with fear that the entire city would vanish. Refugees streamed toward the fields beyond the walls, carrying bundles, dragging children, pushing carts piled high with hurriedly gathered belongings. Camps began forming in open spaces such as Moorfields in Islington, where thousands would spend uncertain nights under the open sky. The fire continued its march westward. It consumed the Royal Exchange, the commercial centre of London where merchants conducted trade reaching across Europe and beyond. Flames devoured company halls representing powerful guilds. Government buildings fell. Guildhall, seat of city administration, was gutted, its proud interior reduced to charred ruin. Realizing the severity of the disaster that local authorities had underestimated, King Charles II took direct action. He established organized firefighting posts along the fire's perimeter and placed members of the nobility and Privy Council in charge of specific sections. Crucially, he authorized the use of gunpowder to demolish entire rows of buildings, creating wide fire breaks strong enough to halt the advancing inferno. The king himself was seen encouraging workers, coordinating efforts, even assisting with bucket lines. His brother, the Duke of York, displayed similar resolve in directing operations elsewhere. Tuesday marked the fire's most destructive phase. The wind remained strong, feeding flames that towered high above rooftops. Witnesses described the roar of the blaze as resembling thunder. Heat was so intense that people standing at considerable distances felt their skin blister. Then the fire reached one of the most symbolic structures in England, St. Paul's Cathedral. The medieval cathedral, already undergoing renovation, was encased in wooden scaffolding that acted like kindling. Though its thick stone walls appeared strong, they were no match for prolonged, concentrated heat. Printers had stored books in its crypt for safekeeping, believing the stone vaults secure. Instead, they became fuel. As flames penetrated the structure, the lead roof melted, flowing down the sides like streams of silver lava. The intense heat caused stones to crack and explode outward. The great bells in the tower reportedly melted and collapsed. By nightfall, the cathedral, seat of the Bishop of London and one of Christendom's grandest churches, was a hollow shell, its interior entirely destroyed. Across the city, similar scenes unfolded. Streets that had stood for centuries vanished within hours. Entire parishes ceased to exist. Smoke clouds drifted for miles, darkening the countryside. Ash fell like black snow. Finally, on Wednesday, September 5th, the wind began to weaken. The extensive firebreaks created by gunpowder demolition started to take effect. Without strong gusts to carry embers forward, the fire lost momentum. Though smaller blazes and smoldering ruins continued to burn for days, the main body of the inferno was contained. When officials assessed the damage, the scale was staggering. Roughly 4/5 of the city of London within the walls had been destroyed, about 436 acres in total. More than 13,000 houses were gone. 87 parish churches had burned. 44 company halls lay in ruins. Public buildings, shops, warehouses, almost everything in the medieval core had vanished. An estimated 100,000 people were homeless. Remarkably, official records listed only a handful of deaths. Modern historians suspect the true toll was higher, especially among the poor whose deaths may not have been recorded, or those who later succumbed to injuries and exposure. Yet compared to the scale of destruction, the loss of life was unexpectedly low. The fire's steady pace allowed many to escape. In the aftermath, London faced new dangers. Refugee camps crowded the outskirts. Food prices surged. Authorities feared disease outbreaks among displaced populations. Tensions ran high. Rumors spread that foreigners, particularly the French or Dutch, had deliberately started the fire. Violence erupted against suspected scapegoats. A French watchmaker named Robert Hubert confessed under questionable circumstances and was executed, though evidence later suggested he had not even been in London when the fire began. Amid grief and suspicion, attention turned to rebuilding. The destruction created both crisis and opportunity. Visionaries proposed bold redesigns of the city with wide boulevards and organized grids. Yet practical realities intervened. Property boundaries were complex, ownership disputes were numerous, citizens needed homes quickly. The medieval street layout largely remained. However, important reforms emerged. The Rebuilding Act of 1667 mandated that new structures be built from brick or stone rather than timber. Streets were widened where possible. Building heights were regulated. Fire safety became a matter of law rather than afterthought. Wharves along the Thames were improved for better access and trade. One architect would leave an indelible mark on the new city, Christopher Wren. He designed 51 new parish churches to replace those destroyed. Most monumental of all was the new St. Paul's Cathedral, whose grand dome would dominate London's skyline for centuries. Construction would take 35 years, but it symbolized resilience and renewal. Near Pudding Lane, a towering column known simply as the Monument was erected. Standing 202 feet high, it marked the origin of the fire. Its height matched the precise distance between its base and the bakery where the blaze began, a permanent reminder of how small events can alter history. The Great Fire of London ended the medieval city. Timber lanes and overhanging jetties gave way to brick facades and broader streets. Urban planning, building codes, and organized firefighting evolved from the lessons learned in those 4 devastating days. From devastation rose transformation. London did not merely rebuild, it redefined itself. The disaster of September 1666 cleared the way for a modern metropolis, one that would grow into the heart of a global empire. Out of ash and ruin emerged a stronger, more resilient city, forever shaped by the flames that once threatened to erase it from existence.